Hello everyone, today we are looking at alliances and Anschluss. Now hopefully Anschluss is not a new word to you, it's something that we have discussed in our first lesson about Hitler's foreign policy, but today we're going into a bit more depth about what Anschluss meant, as well as the different alliances that existed leading up to the Second World War. So on the left-hand side, we've got an image here. This is showing Germany. This is before the Second World War began, and it's showing the union between Austria and Germany that took place in 1938. On the right-hand side, we have the policy of appeasement. And just a reminder for you, that was keeping Hitler happy because his demands were viewed as reasonable. So a little refresh, Hitler's main foreign policy aims. We know that he has 5 main aims that he would like to achieve in terms of Nazi foreign policy. Now the first and foremost is to reverse the Treaty of Versailles. Hitler knew that the Treaty of Versailles was destroying Germany. He felt it was unfair. And many Allied countries agreed and said it's a bit too harsh. So maybe we'll let Hitler not follow all the rules, but still follow most of them. He wanted to unite all German-speaking people. Hitler believed if you spoke German, you were German. Hitler himself, we know, wasn't actually born in Germany. He was born in Austria, but regarded himself as German because of the language that he spoke. He also believed in Lebensraum, which translates into living space. This was Germans gaining more land. Hitler really believed that if he just had more space for Germans to live, it would solve all of the country's problems. He wanted to unite with Austria. This is known as Anschluss. There's a few reasons why Hitler wanted to unite with Austria, but mainly it was to do with expanding the German Empire in terms of population, but also land. And lastly, to destroy communism, something he's going to team up with Italy and Japan on. Now, we're talking about Anschluss today, but there's going to be 2 more foreign policies that benefit from a union with Austria. If you'd like to take a look at the remaining 4 foreign policies, try to decide which 2 are going to benefit from a union. When you're done that, you can hit play again, and we'll take it up together. So you've had a chance to look. So destroying communism, reversing the Treaty of Versailles, uniting all German-speaking people, and Lebensraum. Which 2 of these policies are going to go along with the idea of Anschluss? Well, it's going to be uniting all German-speaking people and Lebensraum. If Hitler gains a union with Austria, most Austrians, about 96%, spoke German, so he's already going to be uniting them back under one nation. And further to that, by uniting with Austria, he's also gaining more living space for Germans to live and work. So a little review of appeasement. Just a reminder, make sure that you understand appeasement is when you keep someone happy because their demands are seen as reasonable. Now, appeasement was quite a dangerous thing to do with Hitler. It was teaching him a lesson that if he wanted something, he could take it unchallenged. Now, you could probably think of a situation where appeasement was used, where Hitler did something he wasn't supposed to do and nobody did anything about it. So try to think of a reoccupation, maybe an event that took place in 1936, where Hitler wasn't supposed to go somewhere and he went somewhere and nobody decided to stop him. So if you're thinking of the occupation of the Rhineland, you're absolutely correct. This showed Hitler that the Allied powers would do little, if not nothing, to stop him, because again, they viewed the Treaty of Versailles as being too harsh. So we're going to look at appeasement from a non-historical viewpoint, and we're going to pretend that you're an employer. So you're running a business, and one of your employees, they're usually late. They're not always on time. They don't always have correct uniform. They also tend to be a little bit distracting and disruptive during the day to their colleagues, and you have given them several warnings in the past. Now today, you notice that they've turned up to work, they're at their desk, they're being very quiet, they're not bothering anyone, and they're being very productive. But they're not in correct uniform, and they were a few minutes late this morning. So what do you do? So when we're looking at appeasement, we need to decide, is it worth challenging this particular employee on their uniform and punctuality? Because they're already doing the work that you asked them to do. And you need to ask yourself, is it worth the fight? If you go and pull this employee into your office and have a discussion with them, is it going to erupt into a large argument? Is it going to essentially be a productive conversation to have? And this is the way that politicians were viewing the Nazis. Even though the Nazis were doing some things they shouldn't be, they were solving the problem of the Great Depression within their own country. And people didn't really want to interfere and potentially cause an argument, or in that case, a war. We can see a map. This is of Germany. This is before Anschluss and before the reoccupation of the Rhineland. But let's just imagine that the Germans have now moved back into the Rhineland. So this land now belongs to Germany again. So Hitler's going to turn his attention to the south, and he's going to look to Austria, because now we can see how the German landmass is actually going to grow quite significantly just by obtaining these two areas. So Hitler is going to try and unite with Austria, not once, but he'll do it twice before succeeding. And once that's done, he's going to look to the Sudetenland, and that's this yellow region here of predominantly German-speaking people that lived in Czechoslovakia. This will be the topic of a further lesson we'll do a little bit later on. So in terms of taking land, Winston Churchill always hated Hitler. He never made this a secret. He openly spoke in Parliament about how he despised Hitler. But Winston Churchill wasn't the Prime Minister of Britain at the time. It was a man named Neville Chamberlain. Winston Churchill very famously said, "I have little doubt that if we had told Hitler bluntly to go back in 1936, he's referring to the Rhineland, his power for future and larger mischief would have been broken. But leaving this entirely aside, the French, there was no section of the British public that would not have been directly opposed to such an action in 1936." We've got three questions to answer in terms of this quotation and the historical context we already know about the reoccupation of the Rhineland. So our first question is, what did the British public think about Hitler reoccupying the Rhineland? And for that, we're going to refer to this bottom part of the quote, where Winston Churchill is speaking about the British public. So the British public would not have approved about the reoccupation of the Rhineland. They would have viewed this as a threat, and they would have been very happy if the British government had stepped up to Hitler and told him to back down. Now, our second question, what did Churchill think would happen if Britain told Hitler to stay out of the Rhineland? A lot of people in Britain thought that this would cause a war, that Hitler would react poorly, and he would actually use his military force to take the Rhineland anyways. Now, if Hitler was told to back down, he would not have become as mischievous in the future, and this was Churchill's opinion. He thought that Hitler was just bluffing, that he was having these empty threats that he wasn't willing to cash in on. And Churchill believed that if we told Hitler to stop, he actually would have stopped. And the last question, what would Churchill think about a union between Germany and Austria? Along with most people in Britain at the time, they viewed this as a threat, mainly because putting two countries into one makes them stronger, and he was worried about Germany expanding into another country's border. So Churchill was solely against this, and he really encouraged people in government to stand up to Hitler. But we know the policy of appeasement said that the British would just try to keep Hitler happy. So looking at our alliances, in 1934, Italy promised to help protect Austria. This is because Italy and Germany weren't really friends yet. They didn't want a strong German army in Austria because Austria actually borders onto Italy. So this is where the Italians were protecting themselves. They said if we help out Austria, it'll stop a potential German invasion of our own country. But things are going to change by 1936, and Italy and Germany are going to sign what's known as the Rome-Berlin Axis. So Italy is going to cut all ties with Austria. They're no longer going to help protect them. They're going to work alongside Germany to get rid of communism in Europe. Now, in November of 1936, Germany is going to sign a similar agreement called the Anti-Comintern Pact with Japan. And Comintern means Communist International. That was an organization set up in 1919 in the Soviet Union to help spread communism. And Hitler and Japan were making the Anti-Comintern, which was to try and stop the spread of communism. This would also encourage Japan to expand further into China. Japan was a really small country. They had a lot of people, and they also had a similar policy of Lebensraum, if you will, where they needed to expand into China and Manchuria to gain more space for their population to live. Now, 1 year later, in November of 1937, Italy is going to come to the party, and they're going to join the Anti-Comintern Pact along with Japan and the Nazis. This is going to create a really strong bond between these three countries. They all have something in common where they don't want communism to spread any further, and they all have similar political ideas in terms of how they're going to expand their own countries. The Nazis, they're going to expand into Europe, Italy is going to expand into Africa, and Japan's going to expand into China and Manchuria. And they can kind of share their experiences and any tricks that they use to gaining more land in a very quick amount of time. So now looking at Anschluss in detail, Germany didn't have a very large amount of land, and we can see that from the map here. A lot of this land was actually taken away under the Treaty of Versailles. But success in the Rhineland encouraged Hitler to try again. He learned in 1936, if I go ahead and just invade the Rhineland, people aren't going to stop me. They'll do nothing about it. So he saw this as an opportunity to go into Austria and later into the Sudetenland. Now, acquiring this land, as we talked about earlier, is going to help three of Hitler's main foreign policy aims. So moving into Austria will help him in three ways. So pause the video now, have a think, and see if you can remember those three policies, and we'll take it up in a moment. So you've had a chance to think. We're looking for the three foreign policies that link into moving into Austria. So obviously Anschluss is the union between Austria. That's going to be the first. Lebensraum, gaining more space for Germans to live, and uniting all German speakers. About 96% of Austrians spoke German. So a little bit of context for Anschluss. He wanted all German-speaking nations in Europe to be part of Germany, and Hitler didn't really care where you were born. If you spoke German, he believed that you were German. But this was not allowed because the Treaty of Versailles forbid any kind of union between Austria and Germany. So for Hitler to actually make this happen, he needed to destabilize Austria and undermine its independence. So he had to cause some problems in Austria to a point where he could either send his Nazi army in or the people would rebel against their own government. Now, the Austrian chancellor, he tried to crack down on socialists and the Nazis in 1933. He actually made their political parties illegal and banned them within the country. And Hitler, you can guess, is going to have something to say about this. So starting off with our timeline. In 1933, the Austrian chancellor, he bans the Nazi party, and this causes a lot of divisions within Austria. So Hitler is going to order the Austrian Nazi party to create trouble, were the words that he used. He was very unspecific about what he wanted done. This was Hitler's way of maintaining deniability. If it all goes wrong, he can say, well, I didn't actually give the order. I wasn't really involved. They acted on their own. In July of 1934, Austrian Nazis, they went a little bit too far. They actually murdered the chancellor, and the Austrian army stopped a potential uprising. A little bit later, Italy had an alliance with Austria. Italian soldiers deterred any kind of a Nazi invasion. But things are going to change in 1936. The new chancellor of Austria adopts a policy of appeasement to try to avoid an invasion. He's just trying to keep Hitler happy rather than trying to stand up against Hitler. The German-Austrian agreement was signed in 1936. And this said that the Nazis will get to put some people into government in Austria, but they'll maintain their independence. So Italy and Germany formed the Rome-Berlin axis. Now Italy is no longer protecting Austria. So in 2 years previously, Italy was standing up for Austria, and now there's no one on Austria's team. In 1937, Italy joins the Anti-Comintern Pact, and this solidifies the alliance with Germany, and it really isolates Austria from the rest of the European nations. In 1938, Hitler orders the chancellor to give key jobs in Austrian government to Nazis, and a Nazi is made the Minister of the Interior. This is really important that this will come up momentarily. Hitler grows impatient. He tells the Austrian party, the Nazi party, to cause more trouble because he wanted a reason to send his army into Austria. The chancellor resigns. Hitler orders his Minister of the Interior to ring him up and ask him to send the German army in. And this way, Hitler then again can say, I didn't do this on my own. It was the Minister of the Interior asking me to send the Nazis in. On the 12th of March 1938, the German army marches into Austria completely unopposed. So a little summary before and after Anschluss. So before Anschluss, Austria was an independent nation, and after, they're losing a lot of their independence to Germany. Before Anschluss, Italy had agreed to protect Austria. After Anschluss, Italy switched sides. Now they're teamed up with Germany and Japan. Most European nations didn't protest the idea of a union because 96% of Austrians spoke German, and Hitler was even born there. But after Anschluss, most European nations feel uneasy about the new strength that Germany now has. Before Anschluss, Hitler promised the Austrian government that if they join him, he would respect their independence. But after Anschluss, he immediately broke that promise and started putting Nazis into key government positions. And lastly, the reoccupation of the Rhineland was a success, and this led Hitler to believe it could be tried elsewhere. And the success of Anschluss is going to lead Hitler to now focus on taking more land, and that will be the Sudetenland in Czechoslovakia. So time for bonus facts. There was a referendum in 1938 where the Austrian Chancellor, in an attempt to stop Hitler from taking over Austria, he put a public vote to the people to ask if they wanted to join. So think of this as Brexit in 1938. The election, though, was rigged. And this was because the Austrian Chancellor actually raised the minimum voting age up to 24 because he knew most people who supported the Nazis were like 20, 21, 22 years old. Hitler heard about this. He was absolutely outraged and he demanded the referendum would be called off or he would invade. And the Chancellor immediately backed down and canceled the referendum. Now, the Germans had their own referendum, which was a little bit of revenge, if you want to say it. The Nazis held their own Anschluss referendum 1 month after they invaded. So this was held on the 10th of April, 1938. And here's a screenshot of a ballot from that referendum. So you would go and you would simply vote by putting a cross in the circle that you agreed with. Now, it says, it's in German, of course, but it says, do you agree with the reunification of Austria with the German Reich that was enacted on the 13th of March, 1938? And do you vote to list Adolf Hitler as our leader? Now, you will notice, if you have a look down at the ballot in the right-hand corner, uh, yes and no. Well, the circle for yes is much larger than the circle for no. Yes is front and center, and no is a little bit off to the side. And the wording of the ballot, do you agree? It's almost a rhetorical question. You do agree with the reunification of Austria. So people had very little choice in terms of voting yes or no. It's not as though voting no would make the Nazis leave. And in that case, 99.73% of people voted in favor, 0.27% voted against. How accurate those numbers are, we don't really know. These are the numbers that the Nazis reported. So whether they're accurate or not doesn't really matter at this point. But it does show us that a lot of people in Austria were actually in favor of the Nazis coming in because it would make Austria stronger by uniting it with Germany. For our lesson today, please have a look on Show My Homework, complete the quiz, and any other work set by your teacher.